U.S. officials tell CNN that 5 armed boats operated by Iran's Revolutionary Guard tried unsuccessfully to seize a British oil tanker as it was crossing to the Strait of Hormuz. Now, according to these officials, the Iranians ordered the tanker to change course and stop in Iranian territorial waters. A British Navy frigate escorting the tanker trained its deck guns on the Iranians and warned them to back off. They did. U.S. officials say U.S. aircraft was overhead and recorded video of the incident, but nothing so far has been released. CNN's Fareed Zakaria, host of Fareed Zakaria GPS, joins me right now. So what do you think is going on here, Fareed? What is Iran's game in this, trying to accomplish with these aggressive moves?
The Iranians were trying to retaliate for a similar British move that took place a while ago. But the real story here, Anderson, is that you have a ratcheting up of tensions on almost every front. Ever since the Trump administration has really tightened the noose on Iran, that is, essentially made it impossible for Iran to sell its oil on international markets, the Iranians have been backed into a corner and are trying to explore how they can use the leverage they have, access through the Persian Gulf, their interests in Lebanon or Yemen or close to Saudi Arabia, and they've been putting kind of turning up the heat as much as they can. The Trump administration seems to want this, seems to want to add to the pressure, but it's not clear to what end. There is no negotiating strategy laid out. There is no diplomatic solution they have put forward. So the danger here is in an atmosphere of high tension with both sides not wanting to back down. You could easily see some kind of miscalculation, and it could lead to the situation that I don't think the Trump administration wants, which is war. The administration has a lot of pressure on Iran, but it's not clear what its strategy is. What is the goal?
The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United States are two unexpected allies. One's an autocracy, the other a democracy. There are many differences between the two, but one thing they have in common is that each country has what the other wants. Saudi Arabia has oil and the United States has arms. To understand how reciprocal the relationship is, we need to go back to how it started. Saudi Arabia as we know it was founded in 1932 by King Abdulaziz. A few years later, oil was struck and American companies, sensing an opportunity, moved in.
It was a relationship which was based on a company, Standard Oil, in the name of the US government trying to look for access to oil resources.
This picture shows where the relationship crystallized. This was Saudi Arabia's founder, King Abdulaziz, meeting US President Franklin Roosevelt on the USS Quincy on the Suez Canal in 1945.
The United States wanted to have a secure access to the oil resources, and at the same time they would provide the Saudi Kingdom with access to arms and obviously provide protection.
As the years passed, the relationship strengthened. Standard Oil founded Aramco, the Arabian-American oil company which controlled every oil well and barrel in the country. And as the oil flowed into the US, American-made arms flowed into the kingdom. Between 1950 and 2017, Saudi Arabia bought more than $100 billion worth of arms from the US, making the kingdom the country's biggest customer. It's a relationship so strong that even when Saudi Arabia and the US are on opposite sides of an issue, arms continue to flow. For example, in 1973 and the start of the Yom Kippur War, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise offensive against Israel. The US responded supporting Israel, which Saudi opposed. The kingdom and its OPEC allies responded by setting an oil embargo, reducing production and significantly impacting the US economy. But there was no slowdown in arms sales.
If we look at the actual figures of arms supplies to Saudi Arabia from the US, we do see that that was around the time, but we really see a very significant increase in those arms supplies, which then continued over the decades. And partly this may also be related to the fact that that really was the moment that oil prices really increased very rapidly.
Even 9/11, where 15 out of the 19 attackers were Saudi, did little to rattle the arms relationship with the kingdom, which has denied any involvement in the attacks.
Around 2005, there was a dip in the volume of deliveries of weapons from the US to Saudi Arabia, but I think that didn't necessarily have to do with 9/11. I think it had more to do with the fact that Saudi Arabia didn't have the best financial conditions at that time, and that it had already stocked up on a very large quantity of advanced arms.
And in 2017, US President Donald Trump's first foreign visit was to Saudi Arabia, where he signed an arms deal said to be worth $110 billion.
For a long time, Saudi Arabia hasn't really used its equipment very much, but that started to change. In 2015, we see the let's say, the full-scale military intervention by Saudi Arabia in Yemen.
The Yemen conflict has become the world's worst humanitarian crisis, with tens of thousands killed. It's also widely seen as a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia, with Houthi rebels supported by Iran and pro-government forces supported by the Saudi-led coalition. The world has changed a lot since the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the USA began. Imports of oil from the kingdom to the US have dropped by 47% since a high in 1991. Since that first accord in 1932, Saudi Arabia has had 7 kings, the US has had 14 presidents. But through it all, the bond between these two nations has remained unbreakable.
For much of 3-month-old Anna's life, her world has looked like this, a toxic cloud of smog that has choked Beijing for the better part of 2 weeks. The air has been more than 50 times worse than what the World Health Organization says is safe. For her mom, Wang Jiang, it was too much.
Her life just began, and the air she breathing in and out is such a bad quality. I couldn't sleep. I literally 2 nights continuously, I couldn't sleep.
So in the pursuit of cleaner air for Anna and her big sister, 6-year-old Mia, Jiang and her husband opened their wallets. $7,500 for 8 air purifiers, $500 every few weeks to change the filters inside, and another $5,000 for an in-wall ventilation system that pumps out filtered air.
That's very expensive, but think about the house, there's nothing to trade off, you know.
Spending however much money is necessary to keep your family healthy is something a lot of people would probably do. But the reality is that the fight against pollution can cost a lot. And in many of Beijing's poorer neighborhoods like this one, most people can't afford to do much more than buy a cheap, disposable pollution mask.
That's about all Ho Chuan-fu can do. Inside his small home in a Beijing back alley, there's no air purifiers, no expensive filtration system, just poorly insulated windows and frustration. We're helpless, he says, but what choice do we have? We can't do anything about it, so we just face it. All I can do is try to avoid going out when it's smoggy. He's like so many others in Beijing, dealing with pollution that can blanket the city in just 20 minutes, like in this time-lapse shot in the business district. It's always worse in the winter when coal use spikes due to falling temperatures, but predictability doesn't make it any better. We hope the government will treat this issue seriously, says Ho. Everyone wants to see the blue skies, but right now, it's impossible. For now, he'll just wait out the smog in a cramped living room. It's a stark contrast from Wang Jiang and her family. Every part of their lives indoors is clean and filtered, and they say they know how lucky they are to be able to afford that. But when 6-year-old Mia goes to school, only a panda-dotted pollution mask stands between her and this. Because once outside, whether you're rich or poor, everybody breathes toxic air together. Matt Rivers, CNN, Beijing.